I can't believe I'm saying this. Joey 6 years ago would never have said this. Practicality should not trump theology. And even for the sake of approachability. This is what I'm learning, is you don't know what people are going through. You don't know what's actually in their head.
No.
You only have assumptions as to what's going on, and you don't know the work that God's doing behind the scenes.
No, you don't. So
just invite people into the space that is theologically informed by who God is. Kia ora koutou, welcome to Lunch on the Way. I'm Joey Millington, joined by Graeme Flett, and not Jonathan.
No, Jonathan, where is Jonathan? He's at a church meeting.
You know what? There's a lot of I wouldn't call them emergency church meetings, but there seems to be a lot of he needs to go to meetings.
Yeah, he does. But I think Tommy's really enjoying it at the moment.
He loves it. He loves the work. He's like, I love working
I
at
think it's
church.
got some challenges.
Yeah, it does, yeah.
So it's, church is always challenging, but there are sort of points, higher points than where you have to, really think and do a bit more work.
Yeah.
And I think he's in one of those sort of spaces. So,
yeah.
Go, Jonathan.
So he bumped us.
Yeah, he did.
Because he enjoys working at a church.
Yeah.
Doesn't he know the podcast is
well,
important too?
Yeah. He'll be here next week.
He will, and I don't know. I forget what we were going to talk about, but it was going to be. Doesn't matter. Anyway, but today, this is what we're talking about. Beyond the fact that I'm tired.
Yeah. Tell me how you're feeling. Rough night, Joey?
Usually, I tell people we have 6 out of 7 nights are good with the baby.
Yeah. And
1 out of 7, usually you're like, oh my goodness, what just happened? And
you didn't even go for your run this morning.
I didn't even go for a run. That's how tired I was. I had my. This is what happened. I had my running gear on. I'm in the car. It's 10 to 7. I'm at the school. I'm at work.
You've got another 7 hours to go.
And I'm like, let's just shower. I'm like, I do not want to move anymore.
Yeah. Bit of French perfume on. That's,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you know deodorant looks different here than it does in Canada?
Oh, does it? No.
Like the deodorant is like a ball. Do you have that kind of deodorant here?
Oh, I have a stick. Use a stick. You got sprays and you got sticks.
Well, the ones in Canada are like more oval.
Oh, really?
Like that?
Yeah.
And yeah, it's not a ball. It doesn't roll. It's just like a brick.
Yeah, I have sort of like a round ones, and then you can. I think there are roll ones. You can get roll ones and you get spray ones. So
this is really rude.
Now you can tell you've not had a lot of sleep because we're now talking about deodorants.
Well, anything new with you, or do you want to get right into it?
Oh, we'll just go right into it.
All right. So, Graeme, give us some context here. We actually have a plan for the first time in a long time of what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. Well,
so what did you do that prompted what we're going to talk about?
Yeah, well, I went to the Carey Nieuwhof.
Yep.
Nieuwhof. What do they call it?
Conference Leaders Day?
Yeah, it was put on by the Irresistible Church Network. It's a new one to me, but that's what it was. It was put on by it. And so that was here in Auckland. They had about 200 to that. That might not sound a lot to audiences if you're listening to this in North America, but for New Zealand, it's actually quite difficult to get a reasonable crowd now.
Yeah.
So 200 was a pretty good turnout for that. And I would imagine that that number is because there's a number of people that follow him. Mm-hmm. And one would ask, well, why would you go to that when you can hear him all on podcasts? But I guess it's a degree of celebrity pull that you go to that,
And the thing about New Zealand is that because the crowd is so small, you could have a good conversation with him.
Oh yeah. He was quite approachable. I think I was introduced to him mainly because I was sitting there with some other people, there for church leadership and stuff like that. But I didn't really have a conversation with him.
Yeah. So generally, what did he talk about that? I guess we're going to kind of talk through a little bit.
Well, he in the first sort of part of a session, he basically rolled out his approach, and really it was his management approach to leadership. When I say management of time, time management. That was okay. I'm pretty familiar with some of that sort of stuff, and he sort of had various 3 zones and worked around. I call it rhythms. That's how I kind of work my space, where a kind of more productive than others, and in the space where you're not so good, you do other stuff. So it was that kind of thing. And then the second part, he then talked about 4 shifts. Yeah, 4 shifts he saw in church. This is North America.
Yeah.
And then I think he gave us, was it 5 or 6 moves, something like that.
Yeah.
That he would respond. There were kind of responses to those shifts.
So shifts he's seeing and then responses to the shifts.
Yeah.
Okay. So my experience with Carey Nieuwhof is that I love listening to his podcast. I've mentioned this in this conversation before. I didn't listen to him for a little bit through COVID, and then I'm finding he's starting to kind of see some things that I'm also seeing as well, and I'm getting a bit more interested again. And even though this is what my wife would say is that New Zealand's like 10 years behind the trends for North America, but I think that's the opposite when it comes to church trends.
I think so. I mean, we've talked about Canada being very very secular. But I think because you're connected to the US, that has slowed. It sort of modifies that a little bit.
It does.
And New Zealand is very secular.
Yeah.
So in terms of, with church and the sort of drop off of attendance, I think that's quite severe here.
Yeah, and I remember during COVID, what Carey Nieuwhof would say with David Kinnaman from Barna Group, the survey group I mentioned earlier, what they figured was that because of COVID and because of all the lockdowns and quarantine, that was what they called it there, that nominal Christians just weren't going to come back, And when he said that, I'm like, if I'm thinking back to 2019 New Zealand church context, I'm like, there's not that many nominal Christians left in church in New Zealand.
No, I don't think in New Zealand,
I mean?
it just wouldn't be. I mean.
And like COVID,
it's really interesting
when
you call, what's a nominal Christian? Where do we kind of place that?
Someone who just goes there for more cultural legacy reasons, as opposed to.
I think that's well and truly past.
Yeah,
there might be some few older ones like that, but it's pretty much gone. New Zealand is interesting because then you've got the bump that happens in New Zealand because of immigration.
Yes.
So here in Auckland, the church. Well, I think Catholics have grown in New Zealand.
Yep.
So you've got a lot of, New Filipinos, people from India, people from Fiji, South Africa, and that's bumped the church attendance.
Yep.
I think if you were to take away that, we'd be really trouble.
Yeah.
And that would go back at least 20 years.
I would like to, yes, we're going to get into the topic we want to talk about, but we just found something interesting. Yeah. The general thought is that, that the Christian population is shrinking in New Zealand or across many countries in Western countries that were formerly dominantly Christian. I think, at least in New Zealand, that's not necessarily the case.
No, it's more. I think it's much more complex than that, because I think what you've got is that institutional church has dropped off. So here in Auckland, there's no. There's been a little bit of it, but no, what I know, comprehensive work of actually going down every street and finding where churches are, but they're everywhere.
They are.
Auckland.
There's 16 just around the corner.
I know,
and so only a few of them have signs.
Yeah, and they're some of them are very small. 50 people, even smaller than that. 30 people. A growing level of again, sort of. If I call it a house church, that would give it a wrong label, because but they're people that kind of gather in a kind of smaller gatherings, and that ends up being in a home.
Yeah.
But it's not that kind of necessarily house church movement that we would have known of about 20 or 30 years ago. It's slightly different to that.
Yeah, and I don't think the Christian population is shrinking in New Zealand. I think it's maintaining at worst. And I think, but it only appears to be shrinking compared to the general population increase that's happened.
Yeah.
So it's not that there's less Christians, it's just that there's more non-Christians than there were before, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Or more, non-Christians is a broad category.
Yeah, what's interesting in New Zealand is I think what we have in New Zealand is wide and shallow.
What do you mean?
Well, when I say wide, because there's a lot of wide in the sense that Christians, a lot of community stuff. In terms of the practical sort of stuff, Christians involved in sort of
different
involved in social action, helping the poor, or in all sorts of expressions.
And there's many churches of trusts.
Oh, yeah. And I think that's quite...
Charitable trusts.
Yeah, I mean, this is anecdotal. These are just observations, but that's my observation. When I say shallow, I mean sort of not a great depth of biblical and theological, how would you put it?
Knowledge?
Knowledge and awareness, sort of to think theologically and to know the biblical story. It tends to be more surface.
Yeah.
So if you went to North America, you would have a lot. It'd be far more nuanced if we talk theologically and biblically, or in the UK. I've heard that from people from the UK.
You've heard that from people
People that have been in the UK. It's sort of like, gee, it's quite. There's a lack of depth here. So, yeah, that'd be correct.
All right. So let's then get into the shifts.
Yeah.
All right. So Graeme, you sent me a bunch of slides. So you literally took pictures of every single slide.
I did, because I thought, and not that it was new to me, but I just thought, this might be worth taking down and making some reflections on. I was going to quickly type it out and send it to you guys, but I never got around to it.
No, it's all good. So here we go. The first shift that he notes is a church without a great online presence won't reach unchurched people.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because I think here that is a sense in which it's a consumptive kind of response.
Yep.
I get it, because when I'm looking for to access any service, or I'm looking for a product, I will go onto the internet.
Yep.
And I'll do a search. And what appears is, and I'm looking for a place in which there's a phone number, and perhaps there's a list of the products that they do sell to acquire the product I'm after. And it might be a part for something, and that's what I'll do. And if they're not on the internet, they don't exist.
Yeah.
And I think that's his point. So I think he's got a really important point there. But websites are hard to maintain for churches, particularly if you're a small church. They're really difficult. You've got to have expertise to sort of do a website, a reasonable amount of expertise.
It's easier than you think.
Yeah, I suppose so.
You
but then it's time. So it's that.
Yeah.
So somebody might have the expertise, but then they got the time to do
True.
that. Amongst all the other things they do. So I just know in church, I know what it has. Like, you see some websites in church and they haven't touched it for a year, and it's like, really?
I think when I hear this this shift, a church without a great online presence won't reach unchurched people, I'm thinking, obviously this is North America in sight.
Yeah.
Thinking here in New Zealand, I think that's true to a certain extent. Like, I will not, if I was somebody who's not a Christian, or let's just say I am a Christian, which I am, and I was interested in, the local mosque or something like that, I wouldn't walk in there.
No.
Unless I had an idea of what actually went on in there.
Yeah. I agree. I want to see something. I don't want to walk into an unsafe place.
Exactly.
And so therefore, that online presence gives me a bit of a picture of what I might expect if I go there.
But on top of that, I wouldn't even walk in there then. I wouldn't go then.
No.
I wouldn't, if they had an online service, I might watch it out of curiosity, but I wouldn't have any real community connection to that, so I wouldn't have any sense of, I guess, connection that allows me to feel like I've skin in the game there. Until I actually walk in. But I wouldn't walk in.
Yeah, well, I don't know if I'm like others, but it's a bit like a person coming to the front door and trying to sell something. As a hermeneutic of suspicion.
Yeah.
I just immediately go, you're trying to sell me something.
I know.
And so, going to a foreign, unfamiliar space, I have that sort of framework around my thinking. I think I'm suspicious.
Yeah.
I'm on guard. So, the question is, does an online presence mean I'm just going to walk into a place? I'm not sure in New Zealand.
I don't think for most people, for a vast majority of people, that won't be the case. But I'll tell you what, we're going to be launching Alpha, and we are launching Alpha big in term 2. So April 28th at the church, and the whole church is behind it, which is awesome.
I think it's fantastic.
So many people have responded positively to want to be a part of it, and I already know people who will be a part of it as attendees, who aren't necessarily Christian or are, on a journey.
Yeah.
And I am going to make a video that is somewhat engaging, that I am going to it's going to be less than a minute long. I'm going to put some money behind it. I'm going to publish it on Facebook and other platforms to particularly target the area that we live in. And I don't expect anybody to show up necessarily because of that video. But the idea is I want them to know that the church is there, that the church does try and address questions of meaning, purpose, and faith, and that there is a place to discuss those things if they want to. And when I'm thinking about someone who's unchurched coming into a community like this, I'm like, I need to target them. I need to try and get the message in front of them in different areas of their life.
Yeah.
So we're going to have a big sign in the front of the church as they drive into the suburb. So they'll see it then. Hopefully they'll see it on Facebook as they're scrolling, and they might watch it. Hopefully, especially because I think I'm going to try and find some drone footage or aerial footage of East Auckland or Burswood.
Oh, that's nice.
So they know, oh, this is where I live. Oh,
Yeah.
can I see my house?
Yeah.
You know, that's the idea. So they might keep watching. And then we'll be doing letterbox drops with invitation postcards, you know. So there's different avenues for people to be like, oh, something is happening right around the corner. I might not go, but something's happening.
Yeah, and maybe this is I really like what you do. I mean, I think Alpha's Alpha's a really good. I don't say cool package, but the process is really good. It gives opportunity. It's a non-confronting space, and I think what you're doing there is a familiarity. If I'm kind of familiar with that, then I might feel a little more comfortable to even have a look.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's part of it. I think a familiarity.
Yeah.
But you know, the thing is that I mean, it's really interesting. We're fighting for visual space.
Yes.
And visual, you say, well, visual space, but when you think about power, visual space is about power. Mm-hmm. You know, so power to get to get people's attention. So
it's tough.
There's I mean, I remember when I was doing my research, one book called The Economy of Attention. It's very interesting. Mm-hmm. That you're actually trying to get attention, but in a very noisy space, that's quite difficult.
Yeah. Because
people got so much stuff coming at them.
It's like when you're in I don't go to nightclubs, but you know, a loud environment like that.
Yeah.
And imagine you're trying to get someone's attention from across the room.
Yeah. Yeah.
What are you going to do?
Yeah.
How are you going to get their attention?
Yeah.
That's the online space.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, that's about trying to get enough. I mean, it's interesting with YouTube. I watch a lot of YouTube.
Same.
Yeah, I mean, I don't watch much TV now. I just find stuff more interesting on YouTube. But it's what pops up in YouTube is interesting. And and the algorithms do play to what your likes are.
Yeah.
But that's that's what you want. You're trying to get hits.
Yeah.
So that gets it into that space. At least people see it. Because if it's not coming on the YouTube, they're not even going to. Yeah. I mean, it's got to get to there before they even go, I think I'll have a look at that.
So my idea with everything you're saying, my idea with Alpha, because I think that's the avenue for people who are unchurched to come into church, is not just Alpha, but a thing like that.
Yeah.
Because I don't think non-Christians who have no contact point with Christianity or even people who are Christian are going to walk through your front doors of your church anymore.
No, I don't think so.
If they do, it's rare. And what a blessing.
Actually, let's qualify that. If you're living in, so the church I go to in the city, Elim Church, part of the campus that runs across, Auckland and then north and south a little bit, there are a lot of, it's very multi-ethnic. I mean, I'm a white European and I'd be very much in the minority.
Yeah.
So a lot of Southeast Asian, I mean, that could be Indian, it could be Chinese, Filipino, all of Asia, Indonesian, Japanese, Korean, they're all there. Now, they've had quite an impact on the inner city because in the inner city you've got these rather large apartment buildings, and that's where they go. So what happens is somebody comes and learns, and so people coming to faith is quite regular there. Yeah, people will come to faith, and because what happens is
how will they come to faith?
Well, the thing is, they come to New Zealand. So if I'm coming to learn English, they're lonely. Yeah. So community to come along to something, and be part of it. Yeah.
The touch point is learning English.
Yeah, and so they have other like another kind of program that they're going there is new to the country and very practical stuff. How do you get a license? Yeah. How do you go and buy food and all these different things. So they put that on. So. And then there's another one I've just noticed. So that's there. Mm-hmm. The other one, as I've noticed more recently, and this is interesting because I think I've turned up to church and a couple of Sundays of this year, bumped into people from North America who are church people who've come to church. And I said to them, so how come you came to Elam? We're just visiting. We're touring the country and saw it on the website, and we thought we'd come. So there you go.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
No, I'm glad you said that. But it wasn't just the Sunday service that brought people in. It was the other ministries around it that addressed a specific need in the community that then helped bring people into that community.
Yeah, that's right.
Exactly. So when I said people aren't just going to walk up off the street is... they will to your ministries, certainly, or else your ministries aren't targeted, aimed properly.
Yeah.
But I don't think somebody who has no connection to church is like, I'm going to go to church. I think they'll go to something else that could be church adjacent, like an Alpha or an English class or what to do in your first 6 months in the country class, all those different things.
Although I had an interesting experience on
Tell me I'm wrong, Graeme.
No, I think you're right. But I had an interesting experience because you mentioned you went to the Anglican church at Matakana. Well, I was up there, we took the weekend away, went away in the caravan and stayed at Lee, went down to Matakana to the markets. And so you're walking through the markets and the Anglican church is open. Right open, So I think, this is the church that you mentioned in the podcast.
The nice one by the
theater. So they just had it open. And I walked in there and it says, light a candle, have some space for yourself.
Yeah.
And then I started talking to the woman who was just looking after the space. And I said, so, do many people come? She said, I've had about 20 walk in this morning.
Yeah.
And just sit there and like the building and like the space. So I think...
People can walk on off the street.
Yeah, they can walk on the street. But that is a particular... It was located right within the marketplace.
Right there.
It didn't look... It wasn't down the road. It was right in where people were mingling and walking. And it looked very like it was part of the market.
Yeah.
I thought that was pretty cool.
That is cool. Yeah. So that's
in
actually...
that sense,
That's strategic,
Yeah.
All right, let's keep moving on.
Yep.
The next one was shift number 2. People are longing for transcendence more than immanence. So what do we mean by transcendence and immanence?
Yeah, well, I thought Carey Nieuwhof, I don't think he actually unpacked that a whole lot, really, and I thought it was a little bit light.
So what did he say?
I can't quite remember. It was sort of, actually, I can't quite remember.
Is the statement pretty clear enough? People just want something deeper.
Yeah. Just
they want to look up more than look next to them.
It sort of was a bit around some other stuff he sort of said about it doesn't want to be the same as the marketplace.
I see.
I think people are looking for something larger than themselves.
Yeah.
That why I think people go to like a rugby match here. With a Coldplay concert.
Yeah.
There's something beyond just me in this world. There's something beyond us. And I don't think he kind of really got there without that. And I think part of this is around, and this is very familiar to me because as a Pentecostal, we're really good at being contextual. We find the environment and then we just replicate that environment as a kind of point of contact. The trouble is that actually you can walk into church and it can be as one of my son-in-laws said, it's like going to a rock concert. So he's Catholic, and I think he's got a point. It's so familiar, it's sort of overly imminent.
Yeah,
and so where is that sort of otherness? Where am I experience the kind of transcendence of God? The kind of think that the God is there's something beyond just this world and my life experience. So I think that's what he's getting at, So I've talked about this before, but Marshall McLuhan and his son as well he talks about in one of his books about anti-environment. Now, McLuhan is Catholic, so he converted from being a Presbyterian, brought up a Presbyterian. This is Marshall McLuhan, died in 1980. But he talks about in one of his books about anti-environment. I just was quite fascinated by that actually when we go into a church building, that it's beyond what we're familiar to, so it ruptures that kind of familiarity, and I think that's mixed with a sense of transcendence.
Well, that's definitely the impression I get when I go to cathedrals.
Yeah.
You're just like, I'm not just like stepping back in time.
No.
I'm stepping into like a different reality.
Yeah.
In a sense.
Yeah.
And but when I hear this, when I hear the shift from transcendence to from immanence to transcendence, what I'm hearing is exactly what many people who in my generation are
So what's
sensing.
that for you then?
So what that is for me is, I think the reason why you have what Sam Burrows, who was a previous guest twice, has mentioned, we're just as spiritual as ever, and if anything, the millennial generation is probably one of the most spiritual generations. So they're open to spirituality because they are wanting that transcendence.
Yeah.
Right? And it can be found in immanent forms with connection with others and in communal things, but that's where they find that transcendence. So they go on, yoga, hot yoga retreats, or meditative exercises. Yeah. There's some people who I watch online who do these guys, Yes Theory, who have YouTube videos, and they try and get outside their comfort zone by doing things that are difficult. At first, it was them just being annoying, and then it turned into something quite substantive. And some of them are more disciplined at meditation every morning than I am at reading my Bible.
Well, yeah.
And I'm quite confronted by that, but personally, where I'm like, they see it as not just a way of setting up the day; they see it as a way of like connecting into something deeper. And I think that's true. That shift is true. People want that transcendence, and that's why I think high churches, with Anglicans and Catholics and others and Greek Orthodox, are becoming more into people's are gaining people's consciousness or awareness more, is because it's like that's in the most explicit form of transcendence.
I think there's a relationship with transcendence and immanence. I think if you just push one way and delete the other,
you can't.
You're in equally as much trouble as you push for immanence, and it's all immanent, but where's the transcendence? So, an example of that would be, say, that on Sunday, walking into the Anglican church up at Matakana. So people would walk in. I'm going to a fair that's very familiar. I walk into a building that's slightly unfamiliar, but it's still familiar. And then you're invited to light a candle and sit in silence. Now there's a transcendence part. Yeah. It's like it's not disconnected to the material world.
No.
So there's a bridge there to get there.
Yeah, you walk in.
Yeah, so silence and candles become that sort of traversing point to making connection to it's not just me. It's there's something. I'm part of a world that stretches beyond my time and back before my time. So I think maybe this is also the desire, which I think we've talked about. I'm sure we've talked about this, particularly in the Catholicism, the movement, the ressourcement, to go back to the Church Fathers and back to Scripture. And I think that's why I like history, and I like kind of the big reach back, because that sort of creates that sense of transcendence, and I'm something bigger. I'm part of the great tradition.
Yeah, well, if we look at obviously Jesus,
yeah,
that's the transcendent becoming immanent.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that brings us, if I'm thinking with my biblical theological hat on, that the incarnation is Genesis chapter 2.
Yep.
Of God walking in the garden with his creation.
Yeah.
And you're right, you shouldn't push to one end or the other.
No.
Clearly a shift has happened where it was all about immanence was the thing.
Yeah.
For who knows how long. And now people in a new generation, or a generation coming of age, if you will, are like, where's the meaning? Where's the big stuff? Where's the beyondness? And Christianity and Jesus merged the two together.
Yeah.
The transcendent became immanent. The Word tabernacled with us. The Word became flesh.
Yeah.
And I think, if I can get a bit more evangelistic, I think it's actually in that connection.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like, how can you I think even for somebody who's searching for transcendence, which many people are, like I have one person in my wider family who's been searching for a long time. I haven't seen them in a little while, but I know they're searching for transcendence through what they're doing. And a part of me is like, the next time I see them, I'm going to try and say, and I'm going to try and steer the conversation in this way, that Jesus is the transcendent that meets you where you're at now.
That's the connecting point. Otherwise, you become esoteric.
Yeah.
I mean, in a very practical way, I think this is important. It's important to keep those 2 points together, the immanence and transcendence, in the sense of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
So an example of that would be, take a look at the Eucharist or communion. And have a look at the way you're doing it, because I think that what happens, we're in danger of saying, okay, we do this, but we're in danger of kind of making it sort of almost esoteric because it disconnects. We're not, so in other words, in the church I go to, and that's respectfully to the church I go to, I'd be given a cup at the door. There's no table at the front. We pull the piece of thing off and we eat the bread and we drink the cup. There's no kind of it's kind of transcendent, but it's lost its connection to the immanence of and how is that expressed? Oh, there's a table at the front. There's a the bread came. There's a connection between those 2 points rather than it being sort of magical.
Yeah, and when I first moved to New Zealand, I certainly in the East Coast of Canada came from quite a low church understanding of communion, of the Eucharist, and then when I came here, the lead pastor had a whole liturgy around that, and we celebrated it on the first Sunday of every month, right? Which was more than I had previously, and I really appreciated that. And my theology was already beginning to change around it. Yeah. And at first, I was like, "Well, I haven't done like a proper liturgy around this before," and it's a bit weird in my thinking, but I was open to it. And then now, a part of me is like, I don't want to go back.
No,
because what's beautiful about it is when you have the liturgy around communion, and you do have the physical elements there, and people, and you elevate the thing itself.
Yeah, that's right. So there's this lovely bridge between those 2 points.
There is.
I mean, I would even think in terms of communion. If I was pastoring now, I wouldn't do this every time, but I would even go so far as inviting a group of people who would like to bake the bread in the morning. Yeah. And if it was a church kitchen, bake it in the oven. And then, so they're serving by baking the bread. And then we bring the bread out and we actually break it, the bread that we put together. We break it and we're smelling the bread. But it's, so the sense of immanence in material world, but there's transcendence in the sense of what it means. Yeah, yeah. And, so people are getting it.
Yeah, well, even like when I see in a Catholic service, and we'll move on after this one, in a Catholic or Anglican moment, the high point of Mass is the Eucharist, and it's like the whole liturgy is like this transcendent expression. Yeah. But what's beautiful is you then come and approach. Yeah. It doesn't. Yeah. And symbolically, you could say it comes to you as well if you have a different method of doing it. But it doesn't really matter because there's the transcendent, there's God, but he's immanent too because you can approach him. Yeah. He's close. Yeah. And I think those two things. That's why. So when we lower communion, make it approachable, quote unquote. We're only demonstrating immanence and immanence.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's like, no, we need to bridge the gap, transcendence and immanence together.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's a very interesting thing to reflect about how we do say something like the Eucharist or communion. Because we can, if we're not thinking it through really well, what's going on here, we can either sort of make it so low that it's like doesn't mean anything, or kind of push it away so it ends up being sort of in the kind of transcendent, but actually esoteric.
So here's the second part of shift 2. We don't need to talk about this really that much because we just kind of did. Yep. Too often people come to church looking for God and only finding us.
Yeah, well, that's I think, again, sort of degree of being... I don't hear it quite so much now, but in my Pentecostal environment, contemporality is the word. Yeah. It needs to be contemporary, or it needs to be relevant. There's a beautiful line in Henry Nouwen's book, I think In the Name of Jesus, where he talks about the irrelevant leader, and he makes the point that's you need to become an irrelevant leader. Yeah. And I think the point he's making is that we don't have to be like the world. We're not necessarily like the world, and I think there's a danger of that we have can. I mean, this gets complicated because you go. About mission is about connecting with the context, but the danger is that we contextualize, but then we what's the word? We become complicit with the culture. We're not different to it. Yeah. So I think there's a bit of that there. Yeah. The relevance of being overly relevant. Yeah. And then it's no different.
Well, and I think what he's getting at as well is when people come to the Sunday gathering, they find us where they're really looking for God. Yeah. Is we dominate and make the service more about us.
Yeah.
So I know in a shift that's happening in me right now is I actually want to preach less.
Yeah.
And I would love for there to be more elements around the service that are not dependent upon me or dependent upon personality.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's even this part is that, look, so Pentecostalism, charismatic tradition, it's been, charismatic renewal in New Zealand's been pretty significant. And then you've got the sort of Hillsong, all the modern music, which plays on the line of continuous, a flow all the way through the service. Now with we can blacken a room, so a lot of churches have built buildings have a black auditorium, so we can edit the service extremely well. Now the problem is, and this is when I was pastoring, you can have an order of service and you should, know where you're going.
Yep.
But there are parts in that you can't control. And I used to be, kind of bit anxious about that, and time and everything. And then I realised that in the process, those kind of uncharted spaces where something doesn't work quite properly, or, God's in those spaces.
Yeah.
So there's a danger we can over-edit a service.
Yeah.
So I think that's around that.
Mm-hmm. All right, shift 3.
Yeah.
People are looking for an alternative to the culture, not an echo of it.
Well, it's similar to what we just said.
Similar to what we just said.
Yeah.
People want, why would I want to engage with a religion that looks a lot like the world but just watered down?
Yeah, and I think that goes also to the way in which are we just cookie cutting church,
Yeah.
And I think that's why, I guess in preaching and in the way that we do things, we need theological imagination.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, and knowing why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
Even explaining why we do it this way.
Yeah.
But I mean, some churches sort of cut out communion because it wasn't seeker friendly, and I'm going, big mistake.
Yeah, I feel like
that, all that sort of stuff can, and that's what in the seeker service type, push. That's what I think we did.
Yeah, I think everything should be justified primarily through a theological lens.
Yeah. Yep.
If we're finding that we are justifying something primarily through a practical lens, and then further supplementing it through, we can find a theological reason for this.
Yeah.
That we shouldn't make the call.
No.
Practicality, and as I can't believe I'm saying this, Joey 6 years ago would never have said this. Practicality should not trump theology. And even for the sake of approachability. Because people can, this is what I'm learning, is you don't know what people are going through. You don't know what's actually in their head.
No.
You only have assumptions as to what's going on, and you don't know the work that God's doing behind the scenes.
No, you don't. So
just invite people into the space that is theologically informed by who God is.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. The danger is that we just, we just look at something about, its efficient outcomes.
Yeah.
And driven by, and in New Zealand, there is the number 8 wire culture. You've heard that. So.
Yeah.
So Kiwis sort of ingrained in the culture.
Just get it done.
Yeah, it's like, it's very pragmatic.
Yeah.
And so the line goes, well, if it works, then it's right.
Yeah.
And you're going, well, I don't think that's not a great way to think about something.
Yeah. Well, when we were both of us were at a conference, I won't say what conference or who was speaking or anything, but somebody asked a question, well, what should we do about this issue?
Yeah.
And the person who had the mic said, we need to think long and hard about it. And it was a very it was a big moment where we need to do something now.
Yeah.
And the person didn't like that answer. So immediately they said, you got to be kidding me. Like, as the person's responding.
Yeah.
And then the person who was responding doubled down and said, no, in New Zealand, we don't think enough about what we're actually doing before we do it.
Yeah.
And then the person relented, and I was like, dang, that was a pretty contentious moment. Do you remember that, or were you gone?
Yeah, I do. I know exactly what I do.
Exactly what I mean?
do. Yeah. And the person who was, he's pretty smart.
Yeah,
he knew exactly who he hasn't just lived in New Zealand.
Yeah.
He's lived in other parts of the
Yeah,
world.
yeah.
So,
It was intense, but that just pointed to the reality.
Yeah, well, one of the memes that I've been from sort of, over my tenure of pastoral ministry, I heard quite a lot. I didn't really agree with it. There is an element of truth, and this person picked it off, North American big church person. You preach on Sunday what you can do on Monday. Yeah, but the problem is it just turns to kind of 5 ways to have a happy life.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think the danger is there. You're not in the preaching. You're not crafting a bigger imagination.
So what should you preach to?
Well, I think in the sense you preach the whole counsel of God. I mean, you kind of there's a sense in which we're responding to a congregation. I think that's right.
Mm-hmm.
But we're also about the formation of the mind and the person as well. So I think there's a broader way of actually opening the imagination that just can't be something that completely reduced to doing on Monday.
We should preach on Sunday an alternative way of seeing the world.
Yes. Yeah,
that's what we should. That's what we need to
do. Yeah.
And if that involves,
you can see the trap where you go, I'll only preach what you can do on Monday. It's sort of like, well, that's really reductionist. That's pushed it right down.
But it can impact. Like it can be entirely and very practical.
Oh yeah.
But it can also invite people into seeing things differently.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's sort of. I remember I pushed back on it, and I was in a space and I pushed back at it really cool to some, one person who'd been in church later on going, hey, what do you mean when you say that? So it had really provoked somebody, which is a good thing.
Yeah, it's good to provoke.
Yeah.
Just not to violence.
No, yeah.
Shift number 4, passion is beating polish.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it?
So he's saying that we've the past who knows how many decades it's been about production, primarily North America, but been about production, been about visuals, like you said, editing the environment, things like that, having complete control of the experience because we need to know what the outcomes are going to be. But what he's saying is there's a shift from polish to passion, if you will.
Yeah. That's a simple way of, I think, what you've just said is that we can over-edit. So what we end up losing is we get the kernel, but we don't get the essence.
Yeah.
So the culture's looking for a sense of authenticity. Is this person for real? Is that really who they are? So that realness is generally a little it feels unscripted and it's unguarded.
Yeah.
So it's a bit it feels a bit risque at sometimes, a bit exposed, could be. I think that's what he's meaning.
People are trading in their LED lights for candles.
Yeah, I think and it's interesting too because then everything else can be sort of pushed down to going. So now I've got a dress with sort of a few tats on me, and
it's true.
And then I look more authentic. So it can be packaged too. So
you're right.
So it's the real who you really are.
Who are you really?
For me that's always been something important. But then you have to culturally adjust to your context. So you've got to keep that in mind too.
So an example on YouTube would be about less than half a decade, but probably about a decade ago. All the videos you saw on YouTube were incredibly polished, well produced. Obviously. There were examples of videos that weren't, but like the ones that really got traction were the ones that had good lighting and everything, right? Now, it's all about the look of authenticity. But what you just said is they're still packaging it. So all the videos that take off are what you see are people with like lapel mics, not on their lapel, but holding it and having it up to their face, having really grainy edits, really horrible graphics, but it's all on purpose. It's all to look authentic and raw, even though it's just as highly produced as ever.
Yeah, so it's again, and that's the danger. We lose the essence. It's it's the essence of something that we're looking for, not just the kernel. The kernel is the outer shell.
Yep.
So that's important. Otherwise, we don't connect. But if it's just about the outer shell, then and I think that's where he's going with that. I think that's what he's trying to say.
Yeah, I think he's right.
That passion is kind of suggesting it's this visceral, gutty sort of response. This is how I feel about this. So,
and he would point to the Asbury revival thing that happened last year, where they claimed it wasn't performance, it wasn't polish, it was just people were just playing music and singing and worshiping God, and that was all it was.
I mean, even this podcast is a bit like that. We don't don't prepare, but part of it emerged out of a conversation, and I think it's important just to keep that story in mind, that it wasn't necessary to get on a podcast and now perform for everybody. It was that we're having a really decent conversation. We want to share that with others. Mm-hmm. So. That's the passion comes through.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And I think last week we had a very passionate conversation.
Yeah.
I listened back to it and I was like, oh my gosh, we were not on the same page for most of that.
Yeah.
But it was still good. All right, so we got like about 10 minutes.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
We're on to the moves.
Okay.
So move 1. So those were the shifts. Now he's arguing that we should move into something new. Elevate community and connection over content.
That's a really challenging one. I mean, I think I've said this numerous times about the need for connection, but we need to define what we mean by connection too.
Yeah.
But I think people are looking for relationship, which is interesting with it. We put a lot on church and church service, but what happens before and after is really important. Mm-hmm. And one could say, well, how do you measure a healthy church? I wouldn't just reduce it to this, but it's a really interesting observation. How long do people linger after the service?
Yeah.
If they're all gone, well, is that all about content and not about connection? So I think it's just longing for relationship.
Yeah, I would agree with because people have been so focused on content, especially through COVID. That's entirely what it was. The services online were just content. It was like we were just doing well-organized, multifaceted TED Talks online. Yeah. And it was really hard to engage people. And so it was on-demand content church, right? And I would agree that community and connection are important, but that's everybody wants that, and everybody's wanted that. If anything, it's a desire more now than ever before because people are so much lonelier than they ever have been. So what I really want to see a move into is, focus less on the content and focus more on the actual doing. And because the content's there, because discipleship doesn't necessarily happen just in information transfer.
No.
Discipleship happens when you're in community together doing something. And you're doing ministry together, whether that looks like explicit evangelism, whether it looks like serving your community, serving your neighborhood, actually doing something together is where the discipleship happens. You need that informed with knowledge and content, certainly, but it's like when I read a book, like a self-help book or something. I think Atomic Habits is the book I have right now, How to Be More Disciplined. That's great and helpful information. But unless I actually do it, it's not changing me.
No, I was reading last night, so I'm reading a lot of stuff around supervision because it's supervision coaching, which is a field that I'm tipped into. Zero learning, and zero learning is exactly what you're saying. Yep. So I know, but actually I haven't really learned this until actually doing something with it. I think that's quite a good distinction.
Yeah.
So I can go online and watch the best of the best communicators.
Yep.
So I mean that can be, well, why would I go to church if it's just about content, when I can go and watch N.T. Wright or other,
well-versed theologians.
Eloquent theologians and teachers.
Because church is not about the content.
Exactly.
Yes.
So then we need to think about what goes on in church. And I think this comes back to, in terms of discipleship, so the word discipleship, Greek word, one of the things is learner. So what we don't just go along to learn, but in one sense, it's a formation.
Yeah.
So the formation is happening in all sorts of ways, and not just in terms of our eyes and cognition. It's actually the environment. So, again, get on with my hobby horse. We need to watch the environment. Move to the next one.
Move 2. Regularly engage both the head and the heart. When you said this, when we talked about this, sorry, my mic's doing weird things. When you said this yesterday when we were preparing a little bit, You said that's a binary, head and heart.
Yeah.
And you said we need to introduce the hands. What about the hands? And then I said, what about the feet?
Yeah.
So head, heart, hands, feet, classic way and a metaphor for saying you need to think, you need to have passion, you need to do things with your hands, and you need to be moving.
Yeah.
You need to follow the Spirit as the Spirit leads, right?
Yeah.
So he's saying regularly engage both the head, heart, and we would say hands, and we would say feet.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Because otherwise we get into that binary of head and heart.
Yeah.
I've grown that where you'll have some denominations, like your Pentecostal denominations, we don't need the head, we just need the heart because the Spirit, it's a false dichotomy. It doesn't speak about our humanity. We're much more whole. And
you have other denominations that do the opposite.
Yeah. What we
value the tradition and the legacy over the current passion in the movement.
Yeah, I mean, there are these frames of thinking of orthodoxy, orthopraxy, orthopathy.
Yeah.
And denominations will emphasize one of those three. Well, it's not one, it's all of them converging together.
Yeah.
So, it is about our right affections, our right passion, but it's not without actually right practice.
Yeah.
And right belief. So we have to bring all of that together. But the legs are our sense of mission. Mm-hmm. It's not static, it's moving.
It's moving.
I consider the way that we relate, actually.
Moving as the Spirit leads. Yeah. And then he goes into some other stuff. Let's see. Move 3.
Yeah.
Create more space and moments in your in-person experiences.
Yeah, well, I think that comes back to what we were talking about before, over-editing the service.
Yeah, and then need for white spaces.
Yep. I remember a few years ago when I was in the UK, and I went to an Anglican church and I went to a Pentecostal church, and I felt so this is sort of a kind of Holy Trinity Brompton spin-off church,
which is like Pentecostal Anglican.
Yeah, but it had space in it.
Yeah,
there were people that were invited up to pray for prayers for the world. In its liturgy, it had the space. So I think space is also silence, pause. Mm-hmm. I mean, for some people, maybe that's what we need in our church is just we have moments of silence because we're not getting it out in the world.
No. Yeah, I think you're right. Is there another move? Because we're running out of time.
Yeah. Move
4. Create a healthy, non-toxic culture. That's pretty broad. Just like it's like do better.
Well, that's really interesting. You picked up that comment yesterday. I thought it was a really interesting one. With the idea of management and leadership and KPIs and performance, you mentioned thinks a recipe for toxicity.
Well, I don't think not in general. So I think within organizations like say where we work right now at Laidlaw, those things are essential because Laidlaw is not a church.
Yeah,
it's not a church.
Yeah,
it's a ministry. It's a educational organization that is Christian and has a goal of partnering with churches.
Yeah.
But it's not the church.
No.
So I think all those things are completely appropriate. But when you begin to overlay certain, not all, but certain business practices that are quite contemporary into church world, it starts to become toxic a little bit. Not to say you can't learn things from the business world. You certainly can. There's things that they're doing that are great that we need help with that make things better. Certainly. But there's things you cannot take out of a congregational community because it needs to be biblically and pastorally informed and theologically informed first and foremost, or else you begin to get into toxic situations.
Yeah, and I think a good question is, so what's your metaphor for ministry? Your metaphor is for ministry.
Yeah.
And that the language of leader can often fall into the category of I'm a CEO rather than I'm a pastor.
Yeah.
And the way in which you may approach a leaders meeting, am I approaching with the hat on of a leader, of a CEO, or am I coming to this meeting as a pastor? As a pastor, I'm coming to this meeting as a pastor. I might think about that meeting much more about the formation of everybody in there. So I might see conflict and sort of pushback in quite a different way as I may see it from a leader CEO view.
100%. And so I was sharing in my home group 2 nights ago, I said, one thing that God's been doing in my heart, maybe we'll end on this because we're running out of time for the camera here, is I was really concerned about the outcomes of ministry early on in my ministry.
Yeah.
And now I'm okay with things failing and things not hitting the targets.
Yeah.
because every opportunity is a discipleship and learning opportunity.
Absolutely, yeah.
And what I'm actually concerned about is what is happening to the people who are on the ministry journey with me.
Yep.
That matters in some ways more than the actual outcome. That's not to say the outcome doesn't matter, because we're running Alpha. I want to see people come to know Jesus. We're going to put prayer and effort all into it, 100%. But at the same time, I know that people, through being a part of that process, as people who are partnering with us, are going to be changed because of it.
Yeah. I think 2 words are really helpful here, because what you're talking about is this: faithfulness, which might incorporate being a good steward of what we give in our gifts, resources and talents, and then fruitfulness.
Yeah.
So I think they're 2 biblical terms.
Yeah.
I think that's better to couch that in terms, rather than I get what success is, but the ladder starts to fall on a very secular mindset.
Mm-hmm. Well, those are the shifts. There was one more, but be led by the Holy Spirit, but in time's gone, and we need to be led by the Holy Spirit. Thanks, Carey Nieuwhof.
Thank you.
Thanks for having a great conversation coming to New Zealand. We really appreciated it, and this wasn't critical. It was just, how do we bounce off of the things that you already thought about?
Yeah.
So thank you for doing all the hard work for us.
Thank you.
See ya.
See ya.